Thanks for joining us today for the second Food Safety Forum session for food establishments. I appreciate your time and coming to one of these sessions. We hope you'll get a lot out of it. Our first session went really well. A lot of people have given us, positive comments on it. So we're hoping. Nick is from Burger Food Safety. He's a really good trainer. And so you'll learn a lot. Basically, some review topics for food safety you may already know, but it's a good review. And we're also going to be touching upon our Food Safety Excellence Program, which is why we want to stress that we're enforcing a new revised food code enforcement policy and also a food grading initiative, which we've been talking about for few years now. And now we're finally at the point where we want to roll it out, see how it goes. We're going to be starting that November 1st as a pilot, and we'll do that for 6 months and get everyone's feedback and make this work for you as well as us. So we appreciate your time. My name is Tara Gurge, Assistant Public Health Director for Needham Public Health Division, and our other inspectors have been coming to a few of these trainings. Thalia will be here a little bit shortly, but we want to make sure you are familiar with our inspection staff. We have Cy, who's a full-time inspector, who's away on vacation this week, and we also have Monica Pincari, which you may have heard of or seen her. She is a part-time inspector, and we also have Pamela Ross-Kung, who we recently hired as a part-time food inspector as well. So you'll see them around town, and so get to know our inspectors. So the other thing I wanted to mention is we have passed out some post-evaluation surveys to you guys, so we want to make sure you fill those out before you leave. Give us some feedback, good or bad. You can be anonymous on it, but we just want to make sure we get that feedback so we can make these future trainings work for you. So I'll give it to Nick to start the training. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Let me just introduce myself real quick. So my name is Nick Reedon. I work for a company called Burger Food Safety Consulting. Essentially what we do is we're a Boston-based food safety consulting firm. We do a lot of different things for food safety. We teach classes like this one. We write HACCP plans. So if there's any of your food establishments that have specialized processes like sushi or ROP packaging, we do those as well. We do mock inspections. Really lots of different hands-on training. So really all the different food safety needs. And so that's what brings us here to teach this course. A little bit about what we're going to go over today. Before we dive in, we'll kind of look at food safety. We call it a Food Safety 101. Essentially, it's like a 30,000-foot view of food safety. So if you've been through like a ServSafe class, a food safety manager's training, this is a much more abbreviated version of that. So it should hopefully be a review for most, if not all of you. But we'll see. And then, as Tara said, at the end of the presentation, we'll get into the Food Safety Excellence Program. I'll touch on that, explain that a little bit. If there are questions on the program specifically, I'll turn those questions back over to Tara. She can answer those a little bit better than I'll be able to. But without further ado, let's dive right in and get started. Okay, so our agenda today, right? So we'll start with foodborne illness, just touch briefly on what foodborne illness is, right? We'll talk something about TCS foods. Those are time, temperature control for safety foods. Those are the ones that we're most concerned about when we talk about food safety, right? We'll get into risk factors for foodborne illness. We'll spend some time talking about monitoring temperatures, proper thawing, cooling, date marking. We'll get into all those fun topics, right? Hopefully I won't put too many people to sleep during this class, right? We'll finish up with cleaning and sanitizing. We'll talk about pest control, preventative measures for pest control, integrative pest management. And then, like I said, we'll end with our Food Safety Excellence Program. We'll review that for you. And then there are the Needham Food Code Enforcement and what that will look like when the inspectors come in to the establishments to do your inspections. Okay, so foodborne illness, real quick. What is foodborne illness? Well, it's a disease that's transmitted to people through food, right? We eat something and it makes us sick. There's some bacteria or virus, or maybe there's some other sort of pathogen in there that shouldn't be in there, that makes us sick when we eat it. So bacteria, viruses, parasites, and toxins. These are what we're talking about when we talk about the things that make us sick, right, when we eat food. Every year in this country, right around 48 million people develop foodborne illness. Okay, these are just the reported numbers of foodborne illness, okay, right? So that number has come down from right around 78 million people in 1999 when we started introducing food safe manager programs, right? So the number has dropped significantly, but we're currently kind of hanging around that 48 million number. And every year, about 3,000 of those people will die from a foodborne illness. Those 3,000 people typically come from one of our highly susceptible populations, right? So we have 4 different groups, 4 different categories of highly susceptible populations. The first one is the very young, so infants, toddlers, those whose immune systems have not yet developed. They haven't really built up over time, right? They're too young to have strong immune systems. The next group is going to be the elderly, so the people who are a little older, and over time our immune system starts to slow down as we age. In addition to that, we have groups called pregnant women, is our third group, and then the last group is immunocompromised. Immunocompromised might be somebody that has a chronic illness that makes them more susceptible. We're talking here about folks with maybe liver transplants, right, kidney transplants, people that have had other different organ transplants, folks that have chronic illnesses that would make them more susceptible to having a severe reaction, right, a severe reaction to foodborne illness, bacteria, toxin, virus. When we are talking about the foods, as I said, the foods that we're most concerned about for foodborne illness are our time and temperature control for safety foods. This is what we call TCS. If you hear that term TCS food, that's what we're talking about. These are the foods that need to be held under time and temperature control, so either hot or cold, right, to prevent the growth of bacteria or to limit the growth of bacteria. We're talking here about 3 categories. The first category that we'll talk about is our high-protein animal-based foods: poultry, meat, seafood, shellfish, eggs, dairy products, right? These are our first category. It's our high-protein animal-based foods, right? We know that pretty much everybody understands that we have our meats, right? These need to be refrigerated. Once they're cooked, if they're going to be held hot, they need to be hot, okay? So our high-protein animal-based foods is category number 1. Category number 2 is a very fancy group of food. It's called heat-treated plant foods. It's just a fun way of saying cooked fruits and vegetables. Cooked fruits, vegetables, and grains as well. So things like baked potatoes, maybe steamed broccoli. If you blanch a food item before you cool it down and hold it for service, right? That's a heat-treated plant food. Cooked rice, quinoa, you put these things out maybe on your hot holding line and you're getting ready for service, right? We're holding those things hot. Those are time temperature control for safety foods. So that's our second category, 2 of 3, right? So high protein animal foods, cooked fruits and vegetables, which we call heat-treated plant foods. And then our third category probably has the most scientific name. It's called the other category, right? The other category. This category of food consists of cut leafy greens, raw sprouts, cut melons, so things like watermelon, cantaloupe is a really big one, bless you. A tofu, and then garlic and oil mixtures. Also cut tomatoes, so sliced and diced tomatoes. It doesn't really matter which way you slice them and dice them. Once the blade hits it, it becomes a time and temperature control for safety foods. Okay, so these are our 3 categories of TCS foods that we have to control. We have to control our time and temperature on those food items. Well, what are some of the risk factors that are present for those food items? The first one we'll talk about is unsafe vendors. Okay, so if we're purchasing our food from vendors who are not certified wholesalers, right? They've not been inspected. They're not proper vendors for you all to purchase your food from. They're not safe sources. Let's say you purchase your food from Pie Guy like me. If I'm a baker, I knock on your door and maybe I bake pies out of my home and I got the idea that I wanted to sell them. Well, guess what? If I'm not licensed, I'm not certified, right? I'm not a proper vendor for you to purchase from, then you're not allowed to purchase from me and to serve in your restaurant. We have to get those from a licensed wholesale vendor. Our second risk factor is going to be temperature, right? So improper hot and cold holding. So this is where when I talked about TCS foods, remember those 3 categories of foods, we mentioned temperatures. Hot food is hot and cold food is cold, okay? I've got up on the screen there on my board on the right side a couple different zones that are sort of marked off. The first one is that blue outer zone. That's the temperature danger zone. So the temperature danger zone ranges from 41 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Anything in between is a no-no. We don't want to see our TCS foods in that zone for too long. If we're cooling food, okay, there are steps for that. We'll review that. If we're reheating cold food and making it hot, of course it's going to pass through, but there are rules around that, okay? So all of our sliced and diced tomatoes, our cut melons, maybe we keep that cold on our salad bar, or we have a flip-top refrigerator. We're making deli sandwiches for lunch. We want to keep those cold foods at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below. On the other end, our hot foods, right? So maybe we've roasted some potatoes for service, or we've got some rice or quinoa that we're hot holding for our customers when they come in. We want to keep that food on our steam table, set out on our front line, our steam table for service. We want that to be hot, okay? So that's 135 and up. So if we take the temperature of an item and it's too low, we've got to take corrective actions, okay? So this is what we talk about when we're talking about keeping our TCS foods hot and cold. It's that temperature danger zone. The section that I've got sort of marked off there, that red section, is a little smaller. That's temperatures that range from 70 degrees all the way up to 125. So 70 degrees Fahrenheit up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. We call this the extreme danger zone. This is where bacteria is growing at a rapid rate, at a more extreme rate than the rest of the temperature danger zone. So if you ever have cooking and cooling in your operation, we're going to go over cooling in just a little while here, we need to move through that zone quickly, okay? That's the zone that is the most dangerous in the temperature danger zone. So some of our other risk factors: inadequate cooking. So if you can see, there's a little bit of a glare on the screen, but that burger in there is totally raw, right? So it's not a cooked burger. So if our food is not cooked to the proper temperature, this can cause foodborne illness. Lots of folks know, we come in to do an inspection and people will start shouting at me 165, 165, and they have their thermometers, right? And everybody seems to know we cook our chicken to 165. Well, different foods have different cook temperatures, and we need to make sure that we are cooking those foods through, we're cooking them thoroughly, okay? And that can help us to prevent our foodborne illness. So my next risk factor is for contaminated equipment, right? We call this cross-contamination. The picture that I have on the screen is fairly obvious. Okay, I've got raw chicken right next to my ready-to-eat lettuce. Perhaps I'm making sandwiches. I'm getting ready to make some sort of a salad for service, okay? So that's kind of an obvious example. We've got our raw chicken right next to we call that ready-to-eat food. Lettuce, tomatoes, other fruits and vegetables, foods that are cooked and cooled, they're considered ready to eat. So foods that you can pick up and pop it right in your mouth and it's safe to eat just as is. That's called a ready to eat food. Something like your raw chicken, it's not a ready to eat food. There's bacteria that could potentially be on there. We need to cook that product all the way through. We don't want those raw animal proteins touching our ready to eat food. What else might this look like in the restaurant? So as I said, that's kind of an obvious example, right? That's kind of like a little on the nose. Working on the same cooking surface. If you work in a small kitchen, okay, if your prep area, your work area is particularly small, we're working together, maybe you and I are working the station and you're dealing with raw chicken or raw hamburger and I'm dealing with the sort of tomatoes and the lettuce and we're working close together, that could be a problem, right? We could have contamination from the raw protein come over onto my station if there's lots of splashing. You guys work with those 40-pound cases of chicken, right? Those big cases of chicken or beef or whatever, we got to marinate those, we kind of splash around a little bit. That can cause cross-contamination. Or how about, have you seen this in your kitchens? Somebody goes over, they take a knife, just kind of spray it off at the 3-bay sink and maybe dip it real quick through the soap and the sanitizer. Sometimes that happens, right? So that's inadequate cleaning. We're not cleaning our utensils properly. This can be a source of cross-contamination as well. So we want to make sure that we're cleaning those utensils properly. We're not using them for one item and then the next without a wash, rinse, and sanitizing. One of our other risk factors is going to be hygiene, employee hygiene, right? So the people that work in our kitchens also present a risk. They do good work. They work hard for us, right? Our cooks, our chefs, our dishwashers, but people do present a risk in our business, right? So good employee hygiene would include proper hand washing, making sure that we're washing our hands frequently, making sure that we're changing those gloves frequently between tasks, right? Also that we're showing up to work healthy, and we're not coming into work when we start to feel sick. We have vomiting, we have diarrhea, we're feeling sick, we're clearly ill. We don't want our staff coming into work, right? We want them to stay home, get well, and then come back when you're well. Okay, that's all included in employee hygiene. Employee hygiene might also include their uniform, so how we present ourselves when we come into the kitchen. Are we wearing proper hair restraints, hats, hair nets? Okay, are our clothes clean, bathing daily, right? We want to make sure that the employees are physically clean when they come into work. Hands, fingernails, that those are clean as well. Changing out aprons, changing out chef coats. Like I said, we're working with those big cases of meat, raw chicken, whatever the case may be, right? We want to make sure that those aprons, if they get dirty, we're changing those out. We change out the chef coats, change out the cook shirts if you have cook shirts, okay? That's all included in our employee hygiene. Also eating and drinking in the establishment. So folks are allowed to eat and drink when they work, right? Just because we work in a kitchen doesn't mean we can't stop and take a drink of water every now and then. That's totally fine. We make sure that they do that in a designated spot. Maybe you've got a break room, maybe you have kind of a back area in your kitchen where we don't have any food or single service paper goods, and we maybe have designated that as our space where employees can kind of take a few minutes if they need during service, right? It's hot in the kitchen, we're working hard, we want to be able to stop, and that's fine. Stop, take your break, get your water, get your coffee, whatever the case may be. We wash our hands and return to work. So those are all things to look for in our establishments when it comes to employee hygiene. We'll talk about monitoring temperatures. Because how do we monitor temperatures? Well, we use a thermometer, right? We call this a temperature measuring device. That's the terminology that you might see, right? It's just a thermometer. We need to make sure that we have the appropriate thermometer for the appropriate task, the right thermometer for the right task, right? We have the right tools. And here we have to have a thin-tipped probe, which is the one you can see sort of on the top right there. That's a nice thin-tipped probe. We use that for thin foods. So if you have, like I say, burgers, maybe thin chicken cutlets that you're cooking, or thin pieces of fish, we want to make sure that we have a thin-tipped probe. We don't want to have sort of the big bulging kind of probes that you have to insert all the way in, those old school stainless steel bimetallic thermometers. Not always the best choice if our food is too thin. So we have the right tools for the right tasks. T-sticks are popular as well. If you have those, we tend to see that in larger operations. The tip of the T-stick will change color. It's a little bit more old school, but we do see it every now and then. So once we get into the prep process, right? So we've purchased our food from the proper vendor, we received it, we know that it's sound, we know that it came from the right place, the packaging is good, and the food is ready for service. We want to get into preparation. Well, one of the processes that we do in preparation that's of particular concern for the food safety folks like myself is thawing. Right, so how many people have seen, maybe when you were growing up, mom would just kind of put the chicken or the turkey on the counter, right? Or as Thanksgiving comes around and the turkey sits in the sink with water all day and thaws out. Yeah, sometimes that happens at home, okay? So there's a couple of ways that we can thaw things out in the restaurant, and we do it properly so that we can avoid bacterial growth and we can avoid having a food safety issue in our establishment. There's 4 methods that we can use when thawing food out. The first method is we move the food from the freezer to the refrigerator, right? And it's under refrigeration. Whether it's the walk-in, maybe it's the walk-in cooler, maybe it's the reach-in cooler. We move our food from the freezer right to the refrigerator and let it thaw out in the colder temperatures of the walk-in cooler. Okay, that will take a little bit more time, but that's an option for us. Option number 2 is going to be submerged under cold running water that's equal to or less than 70 degrees, right? So that's the picture that I've got up on the screen for you. This establishment is thawing out some sort of looks like a frozen sausage, okay? They're doing it under cold running water, right? And it's less than 70 degrees. So we're not using hot water here. We're not heating that product up. We're just trying to make this process go by a little quicker by using cold to kind of sort of lukewarm water right at 70 degrees. Our third method is the microwave. We can thaw in the microwave, provided that food goes right into the cooking process. We never want to take a food, let's say chicken. Chicken's a popular example. I take my chicken breast and I thaw that out in the microwave and I say, geez, I'm going to save this for later on, or I'll save it for service tomorrow. No, we can't do that, right? And microwaves are inherently not good sources of heating food. Probably many of you, including myself, right? We get that plate of leftovers, we throw it in the microwave, we zap it for a minute or two. Part of the plate comes out piping hot and the other part is ice cold, right? Microwaves are not great sources for heating food evenly. They might do it quickly, but they don't do it evenly. And so in order to help prevent bacterial growth, we want to zap it in the microwave and then throw it in the grill, throw it on the oven, or throw it on the grill or in the oven to cook, right? We want to go right into that cooking process. Don't hold that food. Our fourth method is part of the cooking process, okay? So you can take that frozen burger, frozen steak, or whatever it might be, and go right into your cooking process, provided that it hits the appropriate temperature. So again, if we're talking about the chicken breast, I take my frozen chicken breast, I can pop it in the oven, pop it on the grill, and I can thaw it out as part of the cooking process, so long as it hits the proper temperature. Now, below those four thawing methods, I have a couple of notes, which is a caveat for us, right? It's kind of like a warning sign. We say, okay, hang on a second. If I'm going to thaw under refrigeration, I have to be careful with, there's one product that I'm concerned about. It's called ROP fish. So ROP is reduced oxygen packaging. That's our vacuum sealed, our vacuum packaged fish. Okay, this is a product of particular concern. We're worried about botulism here. Okay, so when we're ready to thaw our fish out, we can do this in one of two ways safely. Okay, I take my vacuum packaged fish out of the packaging before I thaw it, so I can take it out of that package. I can line it up on maybe a speed rack. I've got a speed rack in my walk-in cooler. I put that fish on there, that raw frozen fish, and I just let it thaw under refrigeration. I've taken it out of the package. The second option is I run it under cold water. I can run it under cold water in the packaging and remove it immediately when it's thawed, or I take it out of the packaging and run it under cold water as part of the thawing process. Right? So as long as we are not thawing our fish, our frozen fish, in the packaging, just in the refrigerator, we see that a lot, right? People take those vacuum packaged fish and they sort of pop it into the walk-in and let it thaw out. We don't want to do that. Take it out of the packaging, run it under cold water, and remove it from that packaging right before or right after we thaw it out. That way we do it safely. So now that we've thawed our food, we thawed our food out properly, right? We followed one of those processes. Then we cooked our food, okay, and now we're ready to cool it. Maybe we're cooling down a large batch of meatballs is popular, right? Meatballs or soup, something like that, right? We want to cool that down and hold that for a day or two before we get into service. Well, how do we cool it down properly? Well, there's a couple different ways. So again, there's a bit of a glare, but top left, we're reducing the quantity. So we're taking that large batch of soup or sauce and we're pouring it into smaller containers, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 smaller containers. That way that is going to cool down nice and quick. We don't want to take a big pot of soup or chili or sauce, whatever we're making in-house, and just stick that in the walk-in cooler, right? Because it's not going to cool down. It's not going to cool down quickly. It's not going to get to that proper temperature fast enough. We use stainless steel containers. So metal containers will conduct temperature, whether it's cold or hot. They will conduct temperature better than those plastic Lexan pans that we sometimes see. Right? So we use stainless steel containers to cool it down nice and quick. We can use an ice wand or an ice bath. An ice wand, for those of you that might not be familiar with it, essentially it looks like a big inflated baseball bat, and you pour water into there. You get water, wrap it up, and then freeze it in your freezer. And it essentially acts as you putting ice into your soup or into your batch of sauce to cool it down quickly without diluting it with the water. So it's a really ingenious tool. Or you can just use an ice bath. And then the last option is a blast chiller. If you work in a facility that has invested in a blast chillers come in various shapes and sizes. They tend to be a little bit more expensive, but they are worth it. If you do a lot of cooking and cooling in your establishment, you may want to look into purchasing a blast chiller. Essentially how that works is the food is trayed out, usually on oven sheets, baking sheets, large baking sheets, and you can put that right into the blast chiller, turn it on, and it will blow freezing cold air over that food product to cool it down quickly. Okay, so these are the preferred methods for cooling food. On the bottom of the screen, we've got some time and temperature parameters. Okay, so this is where we start to monitor that time and temperature that I talked about with our temperature danger zone. So when we start cooling a product, let's go back to my batch of meatballs. Maybe I get my batch of meatballs out of the oven and I want to cool those down because I'm going to save them for a day or two to sell for service, right, lunch or dinner. Well, how do I do that? Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to make sure that that food product comes out of the oven. Once it hits 135 degrees, my clock starts. My cooling clock has started. So I have 2 hours to go from 135 degrees down to 70 degrees. If you remember a few minutes ago when I introduced the temperature danger zone, that's our extreme temperature danger zone. That's where the bacteria is growing out of control. It's growing at an elevated rate, right? It's growing very, very quickly. So we need to move through that zone very fast. So we only have 2 hours to go from 135 down to 70. If I meet that step, let's say maybe I put it in smaller portions, I used a blast chiller, and I've met my first step. I did a good job and I made it through there. Now I'm going to go on to step number 2. Step number 2 is I go from 70 degrees down to 41 degrees or below within 4 hours. So I have an additional 4 hours. If I meet step 1, I move on to step 2. I go from 70 to 41 in 2 hours or less. And that is how I cool my food down properly. Now let's say I'm cooling my batch of meatballs down and I don't meet the first step. I don't hit 70 degrees in 2 hours. I'm going to go ahead and reheat that product. I'm going to reheat those meatballs to 165 degrees, and I'm going to start again. I should start the cooling process over using a different method. Maybe whatever I did, I didn't pan them out. I didn't put them in small enough pans. Maybe I left a big container of meatballs to cool down. I just didn't do it the right way. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start over after I've reheated and meet these parameters again, okay? So this is how we cool food properly. We don't want to leave our food, like my mom at Thanksgiving puts her turkey in the sink with the cold water and just lets it sit. That's not really proper, right? That could grow bacteria. We want to follow those 4 methods. Well, let's talk about date marking. So date marking is important for a category of foods that we call ready-to-eat TCS foods. So you may see the letters RTE, that's ready to eat. Those are the foods that we can pop in our mouth and eat just as is. So I'm not talking about your raw chicken. Maybe you've got a case of raw steak tips that are going to be marinated. Okay, this is not a ready to eat food. We're talking about foods that have been cooked and cooled. My cooked and cooled meatballs, okay, my cooked chicken breast. If I'm holding it for a couple of days, those are our ready-to-eat TCS foods. Our fruits and veggies that don't need to be washed or prepped anymore, those are our ready-to-eat foods, okay? Why do we do date marking? Why do we have, the 7-day rule? If you've been through this class or a similar class, you're probably familiar with that 7-day date marking rule. We do that for something called Listeria monocytogenes, okay? So Listeria is a bacteria that can grow even in cold temperatures. So you might be doing everything right. My walk-in cooler is at 38 degrees. All the product in there is 38, 39, 40 degrees. It's good. We're good to go. Well, guess what? Listeria, if it's present in your food or in your establishment, can grow in that walk-in cooler in temperatures at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So this is why we have our 7-day date marking rule for ready-to-eat TCS foods. There's a couple different scenarios that I'm going to review for date marking. The first one is this. It's ready-to-eat TCS food that we're holding in the establishment for more than 24 hours that we prepped on site. So I'm talking here about maybe my cut melons. I'm making a fruit salad for tomorrow or for, next, I don't know, today is Wednesday. Maybe I'm making it for Friday or Saturday, right? I've got a party coming through. I cooked and cooled meatballs that I have cooked and then cooled down properly. This is our ready-to-eat TCS food that I'm holding on site for more than 24 hours. This has to be date marked. Well, how do we date mark it? We date mark it following our 7-day rule. The easiest way for us to explain what we typically tell folks during an inspection is if you if you prep a product and you're going to hold it for more than 24 hours, you date mark it by counting that day plus 6. So that gives you 7, right? 1 plus 6. The day that you prep it counts as day 1. So in my example up on the board, I have 11/22. Okay, this is my chicken salad. So I've cooked my chicken, I cooled it down, I shredded it or I chopped it up, and I mixed it with all the other stuff that goes in my chicken salad, with the mayonnaise, the walnuts, the raisins, the celery, whatever else you put in there. You mixed it, and it's ready to go. You're going to hold it for a day or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever you like in your establishment. How do I date mark it? Well, I'm starting on 11/22. That's my day 1, and I'm going to go 11/22 plus 6 gives me 11/28. That's my 7-day date marking for my chicken salad. So that's our first scenario, those ready-to-eat TCS foods prepped on site that we hold for more than 24 hours. My second scenario is ready-to-eat TCS foods that are prepared or made in a manufacturing facility. The closest example, the most familiar example here would be either cottage cheese, like I have on the screen, or a jug of milk. If you have a bar in your restaurant or a coffee station, right, typically there's a little refrigerator, you open it up, and there's a jug of milk hanging out in there for the coffee, okay, or for the other beverages. Well, cottage cheese and milk, these items have on them a manufacturer's pull date, right? Usually for milk, it's like 20 days, 30 days, whatever it is, the grocery store. You go into the grocery store and you check the milks, right? You want to get the one that's the furthest out. That's what most people do, right? You go in and you're peering through, trying to find the one that's the furthest date out. Well, when we open that milk, we open that cottage cheese, what we do is we effectively nullify that pasteurization, right? So that product has a longer shelf life because it's been pasteurized, it's been sealed in that container, right? And it's been treated to have that extended shelf life. When I crack open that jug of milk, I expose it to the environment, I start pouring it into the cups, or maybe I'm taking the temperature with my thermometer. I'm introducing the environment into that product, into that cottage cheese or that jug of milk, and I'm nullifying that pasteurization. So what I've done is I've taken that milk or that cottage cheese with a 30-day shelf life, and I've now made it a 7-day shelf life. So it's the same as my other product. The only caveat here is if the manufacturer's pull date, the date that's on that jug of milk or that container of cottage cheese, is before my 7 days. Maybe I forgot to rotate my milk, and I look in the walk-in cooler and there's a jug of milk that's dated for, today's Wednesday, maybe it's dated for Friday. Well, guess what? I only have until Friday. So it's 7 days or the manufacturer's pull date, whichever one comes first. So I would label that. I will label it with the opening date, okay? And then I'm going to label it with the expiration date. So the date opened is, maybe it's 11/19 in my example here. My new expiration date is going to be 11/25, even though the manufacturer's pull date is December 22nd. Does that make sense? So that's my second category of food. That's ready-to-eat TCS foods that are manufactured in a processing plant, the processed, packaged, the manufacturing plant. My third example here is going to be if we have multiple days. We have multiple days between when an item is prepped or cooked, or initially prepped or cooked, and then when I finish the prep process. So I'm going to go back to my chicken salad example. In this example, I cooked and cooled my chicken on 11/18. That's when I cooked and cooled it, but I didn't come back to work and didn't mix it until 11/22, so I waited a couple of days. I cooked and cooled my chicken, I did everything right, I got through the entire process, I met the temperatures, 2 hours down to 70, and then 4 hours to 41 or below. It's now sitting in my walk-in, ready to go for chicken salad. So I come back to work on 11/22 to prep my chicken salad. How do I date mark that product? I date mark it from the day the chicken was cooked and cooled. It's the earliest date. Okay, so if I have chicken, then maybe I have, maybe I cooked some salmon. I'm going to mix my chicken and my salmon together, and my salmon was cooked on 11/19. I'm still going to go with the 11/18 date because that's the oldest. It's the first date of a cooked and cooled product, of a TCS product. So my expiration date in this example would be 11/24, even though I made the chicken salad. I prepared it. I mixed all that chicken together with the raisins and the apples and the walnuts on the 22nd. So I only have 2 days. Unfortunately for me, I waited too long, right? Maybe waited a little bit too long, and now I've only got those 2 days to sell this product. So I'm counting my 7-day prep date from the 18th, which is when I cooked and cooled my chicken. We don't get to reset the clock just because we took a couple days off, right? So now that we've gone through date marking, a couple different scenarios of date marking, we'll talk about cleaning and sanitizing. This is always everybody's favorite part, right? This is where folks like me get really geeky into this, okay? So if we have in our establishment, the first cleaning and sanitizing scenario we'll talk about is dishwashing. If you have a dishwashing machine that operates with high temperature, so high temperature water sanitizing, we're using a machine that does not use chemicals to sanitize, it just uses hot water. Okay, these are very popular, right? Well, what do we do here? Our machine, our water, must reach 180 degrees Fahrenheit at the manifold, meaning it must come out of the little spray jets that are inside that machine. That water must come out at least 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason it comes out at 180 degrees Fahrenheit is because generally there is an up to 20-degree drop from the time the water comes out of the spray until it hits your plate or your fork or your tongs, whatever it is that you're washing in the machine. It can be up to a 20-degree drop. That being said, we are looking for a minimum of 160 degrees Fahrenheit at the utensil surface. So at the plate, the fork, the pair of tongs, whatever it is that you're washing in your machine, the water that hits that plate has to be at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, well, how do we test that? You can't just put your thermometer in there, right? Or maybe you touch it and say, oh, that's really hot. No, that's not accurate, right? We want to make sure that we're measuring it the right way. There are 2 ways we can do that. I have them up on the screen there. The one on the left is like that little hockey puck looking device. That's a temperature measuring device, a high temperature measuring device. It essentially acts as a plate or a fork. We turn it on, put it in the machine, we run it through the cycle. That device will record the highest temperature that is reached during the cycle. In my example, it's 162 degrees Fahrenheit. So I know that I've hit at least 160 degrees and that I've sanitized my plates or my utensils appropriately. The other method that we can use is with the high temperature strips. They look sort of like these little tags that are over here. You can wrap them around a utensil, maybe a fork, or you can wrap them around the tray. Usually the dish trays have little holes in them, right? They're sort of like grid patterns. You can wrap it around that and send it through a dish cycle. How that little tag works is it will change color. So if it's set to change color at 160 degrees Fahrenheit, it will change color if your machine reaches 160. Sometimes they go from white to blue or black are the most popular colors, or they have the little strips, right? You can kind of peel it off and tape it or kind of stick it to a plate or a fork, and the little screen on there will change to black. And if it changes to the proper color, we know that our machine is good and working properly. So these are for our high temp dish machines. We want to make sure that we have in our kitchen or our establishment either the little hockey puck looking device, the hockey puck looking thermometer, right? Or we have the strips to test our machines. Another popular option is a low temperature chlorine machine. So these machines work, they're not using hot water to sanitize, right? We're using slightly less hot water and a combination of chlorine to sanitize our dishes, to sanitize our wares. These are popular at bars. If you have a bar in your restaurant, you can probably have one of these behind the bar, under the counter. How these work is we're looking for 120 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's our temperature that our little dish puck or our strip must reach, and then we're testing the solution. And we test the chlorine solution using test strips that look just like that. Essentially, the strip will change color from either nothing, if there's no chlorine coming through, right, it just stays white, or sort of that purplish color, and then a light purple, a dark purple, and then black. Most machines will work between 50 and 100 parts per million. That's what you're looking for. That information will be on something called a data plate. So all of your dish machines are required to have a data plate. It's usually a sticker either on the front or the side of your machine that will tell you how it works. It will say this is a low temp machine, the final rinse temperature should be 120, and the chlorine should be between 50 and 100 parts per million. Okay, and you can get that by testing your equipment. So we want to make sure that if we have a low temperature chlorine machine, we've got one of those pucks to check the temperature, and that we also have the appropriate test strips. In this case, they look just like that. How many people have seen one of these before? Everybody. Yeah, we've all seen them, right? This is where we spend a lot of time. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time at this station, right, washing dishes. Okay, this is where the magic happens. In an establishment that does not have a dishwashing machine, whether a high temp or low temp dishwashing machine, we have one of these. This is our 3-bay sink, or 4-bay, depending on which town you're in. This is for what we call manual ware washing. Manual ware washing is when you're washing your utensils with a 3-bay sink and not in a machine. And how it works is there's 5 steps. There's 5 distinct steps. Okay, that first step is going to be the scrape or pre-rinse phase, where we scrape off or we soak the food debris off of our utensils, off of our baking sheets, our plates, whatever the case may be, forks. We kind of get that food debris off into a disposal or into a garbage can. Whatever the case may be. When the food is off or mostly off, we move on to the wash stage, okay, the pot washing. Right? This is the first compartment in our 3-compartment sink. That compartment is going to have hot soapy water. For this hot soapy water, we're looking for at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So 110 degrees Fahrenheit is going to be what we're looking for our hot soapy water. At this stage, we're going to go ahead and scrub or wash or wipe off those dishes, get them nice and soapy, get that soap to remove allergens, food debris, etc., etc. When we're done with the washing stage, we move on to the rinsing stage. That's our second compartment. We can do this in either the tank is filled with water, or a lot of folks, like myself, prefer the hose, those hose attachments. You spray it off, right? What we're doing here is we're spraying off the soap. We don't want to get soap or any remaining food debris into our sanitizer bay. So we want to spray off any remaining residue or chemicals. Then we move to our sanitizer bay. That's our third compartment in the 3-compartment sink. It's the last of the sort of wet stages, right? The wet steps. We let those utensils sit in the sanitizer. If you remember at the beginning of class, I don't know, maybe 2 days ago it feels like, right, when I said that sometimes our cooks or our chefs will come in and just spray off the knife and kind of dip it through the solutions. Well, we don't want to just dip our utensils into the sanitizer and, you kind of dunk them in and then move about your day. Let them sit. And then depending on your sanitizer, the contact time is what we call it, will be different. For chlorine, it could be as little as 7 seconds. There are products out there called Smart Power that can go up to a minute. So it depends on what sanitizer you're using. So it's a good idea to go into your establishments, read the information on the back of that jug, and figure out what's the contact time that I need. Am I looking for 7 seconds or 60 seconds? Because there's a big difference, right? We want to make sure that that sanitizer has enough time to kill off all the bacteria, the viruses, whatever might be present on that utensil. Once we've sanitized, we'll go ahead and let the products air dry. That's our 5th step, our final step, right? 5th and final step. We remove the utensil from the sink, and we put it up on a drying rack, and we let it air dry properly. We never want to take a paper towel or a towel from a dispenser or from a bag and start wiping it down. Even if it's a clean towel, we risk recontaminating that dish, and we're not letting the sanitizer air dry properly, not letting it finish its job. I have a note here that we have to have, there's that phrase, temperature measuring device, right? We have to have a thermometer available at our 3-bay sink so that we can take the temperature of our wash solution at 110, and we want to take the temperature of the sanitizer. So the sanitizer, in addition to a contact time, will also have a temperature. And again, depending on what chemical you're using, and it will say this on the jug, or you just call whoever you buy it from, you maybe buy it from the manufacturer, call them. Hey, what's the appropriate temperature? Some of them it's 65 to 75 degrees. Some of them it's a little bit cooler. If you're using like an iodine solution, it's typically a little bit cooler. That will say it will read on that jug of sanitizer. So when you go back to your kitchen, take a peek at that and determine what you need for your chemical. I have a note here for testing the solution. So again, if you're using a Quats sanitizer, this is what your test strips might look like. They typically come in that kind of rainbow color, right? As opposed to the chlorine, which is more of that purple, kind of light purple to dark purple, black color. We want to make sure that we're testing regularly, right? That's what the code tells us. We have to test regularly. So we set up our sanitizers in the morning, or maybe before service, before prep begins, and we want to make sure that we test it. It's another example of test strips. So the chlorine ones we saw a few minutes ago on the top right. In the middle here is for the Quats sanitizer. Quats is quite popular, and you're likely using that product. And then the one on the left is for Smart Power sanitizer. It's a lactic acid sanitizer. It's kind of a newer product. The test strips come in canisters that look just like that. We need to make sure that we have these present, right? We never want to be using a chemical and not know what the concentration is. We need to test that concentration and make sure that it's proper. Let's move on to pest control. Okay, so pest control, right? Our establishments must be free of pests. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do we do that? Well, we can do that by implementing a few common sense rules, and those are as follows. The first one is denying access. So we make sure that windows, doors, screens, back doors to restaurants are a big one. We like to prop those open during service. It gets hot in the kitchen. We like to kind of prop that back door open. We need to be real careful about doing that because it allows our pests to come into the establishment, right? And we want to make sure that door sweeps fit properly. The second one is going to be denying food, water, and hiding places. This is how we can control it. So let's say we have a spill in the establishment, or we break down a lot of cardboard. Maybe we have a big restaurant and we get a lot of deliveries, or a food establishment. We get a lot of deliveries every day. Lots of cardboard, lots of packaging. We want to break that down and move it out. We want to move it out because if our little creepy crawly friends, our mice and our rats, if they get inside, right, maybe they come in through that open window, or there's the back door sweep broke and there's a little bit of gap in there, and they come in and they see all that nice cardboard or packaging in your restaurant on the floor, they're going to take that and they're going to start building their nests, right, or they're going to eat the food. You spilled a bag of rice or some sauce. Imagine a grain of rice for a little mouse. It's like a cheeseburger, right? And it's like when we go and get a nice big cheeseburger to a mouse, that little grain of rice is a lot of food. It's a lot of calories for them. And they're going to keep coming back. Every time you spill that rice or you spill that sauce, they're going to keep coming back. Our third sort of rule, common sense rule, is to hire a PCO, a pest control officer. Okay, pest control officer, pest control operator. These are companies that will come in and evaluate your business. They'll look at your establishment and put a plan together that's specific for you, whether it's little mouse traps or it's glue traps, snap traps, little cockroach sticky paper, depending on what your restaurant needs. Every restaurant's a little bit different, right? Maybe one restaurant has a couple of cockroaches, and while the next restaurant has mice. Maybe there's a mouse problem. Now that we've talked about pest control, let's talk about the Food Safety Excellence Program. So this is a Needham-specific program. It's going to be launched in November, right? The pilot program will be started in November. So let's get into some of the details here. I'll kind of walk you through it. So these are strategies to encourage more consistent food safety practices among food establishments, so restaurants, grocery stores, anywhere that's identified as a food establishment. There's a couple different principles, right? A couple different steps, a couple different strategies involved in this one. The first one is food safety education. That's what we're doing here today. That's the mandatory materials, the class, the training. That's what we are doing here today. We attend these classes, these trainings. We review this material annually, okay? The second part is enforcement, right? So we're talking about how are we going to enforce it? Well, health agents will identify risks. They come into your establishments. They'll conduct their inspections based on risk, right? And we sort of categorize those risks, lower risk, higher risks. So let's say a lower risk establishment, maybe a convenience store, will be inspected yearly. Higher risk establishment, if you're maybe operating a nursing home, a hospital, or a restaurant or food establishment that has specialized processes. You have a HACCP plan, you're serving sushi, you're doing ROP. those can be inspected 4 times a year. So the inspections will take place based on the risk that your establishment the risk that your establishment poses. Let's move on to incentives. So what are the incentives for us as operators, right, as business operators, to be involved in this and to do this program? Well, we have food establishment grading initiatives, and the fines that may come along with your inspections. If we don't do well in our inspections, we start seeing repeat violations, and I'll get into this in one of the next slides. There may be fines that will be imposed on the facility. Okay, that will all be available on a software called Food Code Pro. It's what your inspectors use when they come in to do an inspection in your establishment. So they will have access to those records. They'll know about that, and they can hopefully better help you to correct any violations, any issues that pop up. Okay, and so as I said, that's beginning in November of this year. Okay, so that's next month. Right, so right around the corner. Grades and fines will begin to count, and the inspections will be made more publicly available in 2024, so next summer. They'll be online next summer. If the establishment scores a 90% or above, you'll be awarded a certificate of excellence. It will probably look something like that, right? And that will be posted in the establishment in one of the front windows. So principle number 4, or piece number 4, right, is public information. This is part of a campaign to make the public more aware, right, to increase public awareness so that the public, the people that we serve every day, can make informed decisions about where to eat, where to purchase food. Okay, we want the public to know about good food safety practices and which establishments are achieving those good food safety practices. There's also an evaluation component, right? So there's that little survey, that little QR code there that's in that red or orange packet. Okay, that's part of this feedback process. Okay, you can fill those surveys out. Your health inspectors may do interviews. They may stop by and ask you for your feedback, and you should give them your feedback on the program. What do you think about it? You can read through the material, right? Do we find this valuable? Do we think this works for our establishment? They really do want this feedback from the owner-operators, from the operators in the town. We want to know how this program is working for you. 6 to 12 months after the implementation, the program, if there's changes that need to be made, maybe there'll be some changes that are made, but we're usually allowing for this sort of 6 to 12 month pilot program, I think is the word that Tara used. And as I said, there'll be surveys, interviews, et cetera, et cetera. There's plenty of ways for you to give your feedback to the health department. Well, let's talk about violation categories. So I mentioned that there may be some sort of fees or penalties that are imposed upon the business. Well, how do we get there? Well, there's two major categories that we're sort of compiling our violations into. The first one is going to be core violations or core items. Core items are a 2-point deduction for your facility. Okay, these are, we'll call them non-priority items, the less severe, right? The less severe items. An example might be there's no signage at your hand sink, or we've observed improper thawing, right? If you let my mother come into your restaurant and put that turkey in the kitchen sink and fill it with water, improper thawing, okay? That's a core violation. So these non-priority items, no tickets, no fines are issued based on these items. We'll need to get them corrected, but they're not grounds for fines or tickets. The second category of violations is the more severe one. In this category, we're talking about both priority and priority foundation violations. So priority violation, tickets and fines will be issued for these. These are 7-point deductions. We consider these imminent health hazards, right? We're talking here about one of the examples I have, sanitizing solutions are not available, right? Or they're not testing, they're not at the proper solution. They're not at the proper concentration. So we're not using those test kits, right? We're putting our sanitizer out, we've not tested them properly. Temperature violations, hot and cold holding, right? Raw food storage, if we're storing our raw food above our ready-to-eat food, those things are our priorities, right? Those are priority violations. Chemicals stored with food. The next category is our priority foundation. So this is the sort of subcategory for B. Priority foundations are 5-point deductions. A priority foundation violation essentially has to do with what we need to do as operators to correct them. So as an example, it includes an item that requires a purposeful incorporation of specific actions, equipment, or procedures by the industry management, okay? And so what that means, as an example here, I've got no soap or paper towels at the hand sink. You don't have test strips for your testing solution. These are actions that we have to take in order to change this behavior, right? There's maybe there's equipment that we have to purchase, like the test strips, or we have to better supply our hand sinks. So those are worth 5 points. I've got a chart here for you. These are the reason I gave you those examples is because those are the violations that Needham Public Health Department is seeing when they go out to do their inspections. This is from 2022, so a year ago. The overwhelming majority of the violations cited, as you can see right there in that bright blue color, is temperature violations, so hot and cold holding violations. So that cold food, right, that TCS food, one of those 3 categories, is held either too high. If it's supposed to be cold, it's above 41 degrees, or if it's supposed to be hot, it's held below 135. We're going to get one of these. We're going to get hit with one of these violations, okay? That's the overwhelming majority. Almost 60%. Then you can see food contact surfaces not cleaned and sanitized properly, right? So we're not using our chemicals properly or at all. Okay, that's our second most. Chemicals stored improperly at almost 10%. So if we're putting our spray bottles of chemicals with our food, with our gloves, right, with our plates, that's a chemical storage issue. The other 2, food not separated and protected, so it's either not wrapped properly, we've got raw food above, maybe we've got those raw hamburgers stored above our salad or tomatoes in the walk-in, right? We don't want to be doing that. And then pest control devices stored improperly or not in use. So for the fees and fines, we're using a principle of progressive discipline, right? So the discipline will start. It sort of starts on the left-hand side, and we follow the arrows all the way over to the right-hand side. What we need to know here is that, let's say during our first inspection, we have a priority item is cited, a priority violation is cited. There will be a second inspection within 72 hours. Non-priority items, they'll be assessed, or a second inspection may not be required. It depends on the nature of the non-priority core item. Okay, so we have our first inspection. If there's a priority cited, the inspector will return within 72 hours. If upon the second inspection there is another priority cited, so let's say I had a temperature, hot and cold holding issue, inspector comes back in within 72 hours. They check the cold holding, and they said, oh, geez, Nick, your temperatures are still too high. Okay, well, that's another priority, and I'm going to have an additional inspection. So the inspector comes back for their third inspection. That's my second violation, triggers a third inspection. At this point, this is when the fees will start. There can be a $150 re-inspection fee. If I continue to have violations, I will continue to have inspections. Okay, so if I have another violation on my third inspection, it will trigger a fourth inspection. There'll be an additional fee for the re-inspection, so $150 re-inspection fee. There may also be $50 fines per violation at my third inspection. So if I continue to have multiple violations, if I don't take this seriously, if I don't correct these public health problems, these issues for public health, I'll not only have the $150 re-inspection fee, but I'm also going to get hit with $50 fees per violation, per priority violation. Upon my third violation, so my fourth inspection, I may be called into a meeting with the environmental health staff and a Board of Health member. And if I have an additional inspection required, that's the last one over on the right, my fourth violation, I may be called into a hearing with the Board of Health, and it may result in suspension of my permit. So essentially, what you need to take away from this is, let's solve the problem here on this side and not let it go further to the right. The further we go to the right, the more violations, the more inspections we have, the more money it's going to cost us, and we could lose our right, our privilege, right, to operate a restaurant. Our permit could be suspended. I have a note here, no violations found or violations can be corrected during the inspection. There may not be the progressive discipline may not need to take place here, okay? Let's get into some ticketing and fines. I touched on this a little bit. Right, tickets may be issued for the same repeat violation observed on the third inspection, okay, the third follow-up inspection. So that's when our fines and our tickets can start to be imposed, okay? For each repeat violation, there's a $50 fine, so I mentioned that. And in addition, there can be a $150 reinspection fee, okay? A reinspection fee, a fine, if there are no improvements made by the third follow-up inspection. So we don't want to get to that point. I don't want you to get to that point. Your public health officers don't want you to get to that point, and you don't want to get there. That's it for today. Thanks, everybody, for coming by.